As the Delaware River makes its unhurried way to the sea, it takes a beautiful bend on its journey, just across from Pea Patch Island. As far back as the Revolutionary War, this bend in the river was recognized as a strategic military site, an ideal line of defense to protect Wilmington and Philadelphia from enemies. But it wasn't until 1863, with the scourge of the Civil War, that 10 large guns were placed here to work in tandem with nearby Fort Delaware to prevent enemy Confederate gunships from sailing upstream. As Union Sergeant Bishop Crumrine would write,
"These guns command the channel and could blow to atoms any vessel rash enough to attempt to pass."
But rash the enemy wasn't, and no vessel ever attempted to sail the channel. So the small community of lucky Union soldiers who lived there, untouched by war, tended to their cannons and gardens.
"The grass is long and green, and I keep it trimmed as nice as a posy bed. Our garden is flourishing with peas a foot high, onions and potatoes in abundance."
With the passing of the war, the site fell into disrepair until in 1898, when the nation was jolted again by conflict. This time, the Spanish-American War.
During the Spanish-American War is when we saw Congress take a new interest in beefing up the defenses across the whole country. But then by the time you got to the 1890s, when we saw the modern fortification really take shape, when they built the mortar batteries, the rifle batteries, and the rapid fire batteries, and the military post and community really started growing at that point.
These advanced technologies were massive and complicated to build, so Fort DuPont turned to the local community for help.
Fort DuPont relied a lot on neighboring Delaware City and nearby Polktown. Polktown was one of the, if not the first, it was one of the first free African-American communities in Delaware. And they supplied a lot of the labor force that helped build the gun batteries.
In time, Fort DuPont evolved into an engineering post and training ground. To serve the new community, dozens of barracks, bunkers, and houses sprang up. Some were even floated in.
Moving day for the Army Engineers, so they're taking a 16-room house for a boat ride from Fort Mott, New Jersey to Fort DuPont.
A few years later, Fort DuPont expanded again and became a training base for soldiers headed overseas.
And then when we move into World War I, it wasn't a secret that, America was probably going to have to enter a world war. And that's when you started to see a lot of wooden barracks being built because they knew that it was going to have to house a lot more troops to help support the war effort.
With these changes, a new, larger community of officers and their families took root, including Bonnie Bonner and her parents.
But let me tell you about Fort DuPont. It was a very small Army post, not too many families here with children, but we were very close. Everybody knew literally everybody else.
Facilities were added to remind soldiers of life back home, especially the movie theater during the Great Depression.
It was a break from the bleakness of all the sad news that you heard about people losing the money and losing their jobs. This is the ticket office. 10 cents for children, 20 cents for adults. There'd be a ticket taker, and you hand the ticket. He'd tear it in half, drop half into a box, and half went to you. The 2 rows starting in the back on the right were for officers and families. The 2 rows on the left were for enlisted and families. All the others were free-for-all. But the children migrated to the front, and then there would either be a comedy or a comic. The Marx Brothers, or Laurel and Hardy, and our gang. Don't forget our gang with Spanky McFarlane and his girlfriend Darla.
With movies and dances and other activities, the base went out of its way to connect with the local community.
There was a good relationship between the people of Delaware City who had no swimming pool and no movie, and they had that here, and they could come and they could bring their sleds too. They had no hills, and they could come with their sleds and they could go sliding. There were 16 horses at Fort DuPont, and they were available for everyone to ride.
In the 1940s, Fort DuPont prepared thousands of soldiers, white and black, for the ordeal of war in Europe. But as these troops were leaving, other soldiers arrived who would also call Fort DuPont home.
At the height of Fort DuPont's time during World War II, there was about 3,000 German prisoners of war assigned here. A lot of the German prisoners of war took on roles that had been previously filled by men that were all fighting. So you had German prisoners of war that ran the trash trucks into Delaware City. They picked fruit on some of the local farms. They even did boardwalk repair at Rehoboth Beach.
By 1945, the Army had outgrown Fort DuPont, and without ever firing a shot in anger in its 82-year history, gave it to the state of Delaware. The state then adapted and reused the buildings as homes and hospitals for a new community. The Governor Bacon Health Center served the elderly, socially and emotionally disturbed children, and children with cerebral palsy and other medical conditions.
I want to think that Governor Bacon Health Center was a good idea to open a health center for vulnerable people, that didn't have access to other medical care. Only it was the wrong place for children. If you don't know the population you serve and they're voiceless, you're never going to have any kind of fair, equitable, successful program. It's impossible.
The health center helped many patients, but it was also a difficult place for children with special needs, with accusations of warehousing hard-to-place children. In 1992, Delaware turned more than half of Fort DuPont into a state park for visitors to enjoy.
Fort DuPont is just a really nice place to recreate. There's beautiful trails out on the river. You can see some of the original gun batteries and bunkers. It's just a beautiful place to relax, ride your bike, walk. Soon there'll be so many more amenities here.
But as the state park was reconnecting visitors with nature, the buildings suffered.
At Fort DuPont's height in World War II, there were some 300 buildings here. And ever since the end of World War II, slowly but surely, one after another building was either purposely dismantled, caught fire, torn down, collapsed on itself, to what we have today.
With the closing of the health center in 2020, Fort DuPont is evolving and being revitalized once again. Old military houses, barracks, offices, along with the theater and chapel, are being adapted as homes, offices, and new community gathering places.
I really think that the people that got together with this adaptive reuse scheme were really forward thinkers. The new construction is helping to preserve the historic buildings. That's what adaptive reuse is all about.
This beautiful bend in the river that once protected our nation is now preserving our past.
What we're doing here is preserving not just historic buildings, but we're also preserving the historic character of the site. It's the redevelopment of a historic site around the waterfront, and it will include over 140 acres of parkland.
We're trying to embrace the history, educate the people that move here, and they all seem to take some pride in it.
Once again, the streets are filled with families.
We're here to create a sustainable community that's vibrant.
This was a community back then, and it's just amazing to see it grow back into a community today.
Just like the Union soldiers of long ago, the legions of soldiers who trained for distant wars, and families like Bonnie's, a new community is emerging, reinvigorating the site and calling Fort DuPont home once again.